The big names in database at the time were IBM, still around, Sybase, not around anymore, Informix, not around anymore, and Oracle. And by the way, Oracle was considered not to be the best product. The others had kind of more robust products and whatnot. But here we are, 30 some years later, and Oracle is the 800-pound gorilla. So sometimes those intuitions, you can't take them for granted. But I think I do go back to the people factor, and the fact that the people were just smart, driven from a product perspective, from a sales perspective, from a just making sure that customers were getting what they needed and so on. That, I think, that mindset should have been the telltale sign.
Welcome to Brick by Brick, where we learn how successful startups were really built directly from the people who built them. My name is Arpan Punyani, co-founder of Garuda Ventures. Today, our guest is Avanish Sahai. Avanish has been a founder, executive at legendary enterprise cloud software companies like Salesforce, ServiceNow, and Google Cloud, and a board member at Hubspot. In this episode, we cover Avanish's experience in the high-performance culture of the early days of Oracle, why product marketing and storytelling is so important for B2B businesses, and why relationships and trust matter so much over the course of a successful career. Enjoy. Hi, Avanish. How are you?
Hey, Arpan. Great to see you. Good, man.
Thanks for joining us on the Brick by Brick podcast. This is our new project here at Garuda Ventures. You're one of the earlier episodes, but we're really thrilled to get someone like you joining us. So thanks again for taking some time out of your day and supporting us.
Absolutely honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Avanish. So we've got a lot to cover. I appreciate you taking time. I would love to talk about mostly kind of the journey you've been on in this sort of amazing career. I'll get into how you and I met. Maybe I'll just mention now for our friends listening, but we met when I was building out our security and sort of partnership ecosystem at Okta, where I worked from 2013 to 2021. Before helping build the M&A team, I was on the partnership side. You were leading the ecosystem effort at ServiceNow. But as I've later learned, that was sort of one stop in an amazing journey you've had. And so I knew kind of immediately when we met, this is a very special person. I would like to stay close to that person. And you've been gracious to stay close to me and be in touch over the years. So that's how we met. And I'm lucky to get to spend some time with you.
Yeah, no, that was, again, it's almost ancient history now, but no, those are fun times. And It's fun to see how these journeys intersect. Right? And frankly, sharing some of those stories and some of those lessons I find it to be both rewarding and frankly fun. So looking forward to the conversation.
I appreciate it. And that's exactly kind of the idea behind our podcast. Of course, now my partner Rishi and I are leading Garuda Ventures, a pre-seed and seed stage focused B2B centric seed fund. And, having been operators for a long time, we felt that it'd be great to share some of these stories from these amazing folks we've met along the journey, and you being one of them. So thanks again. Why don't I hop in and maybe to start things off, you've got a bit of a unique story along with your long illustrious career in enterprise software, just even your origin and your background. So I'd love to hear kind of from the beginning, where were you born? Where did you grow up? And then kind of how did you decide and when did you decide to move into tech? We'll get into your trajectory thereafter.
Awesome. So I am a bit kind of a unicorn that way. I was born in India, but when I was 5, my parents decided to move to Brazil. And my dad was a physicist, a space physicist. And at the time, Brazil was actually setting up a pretty robust space research program. And he had particular expertise around the ozone layer and had been invited by the Brazilian government to come set up some of those programs. Brazil was obviously kind of the ozone hole above the Amazon and so on, which all of us are familiar with now. But this was at a time when this was still somewhat early. And he went there to basically explore and set up a program and thought we would go back to India. Well, turns out they never left. And I grew up in Brazil, so much so I'm actually wearing Brazil is Silicon Valley, which is a nonprofit I'm on the board of. So growing up was Brazil, and the connection to tech was frankly I growing up there. It was not like it was. This was the days of everybody's programming or something, right? But candidly, I owe it to my dad. He, when I was thinking about college, and I kind of knew I was going to do engineering, because the usual Indian background kid. I was good at math and sciences and so on, not so much in biology and literature. And he's like, "You should do software." I'm like, "What's software?" So I did some, I did some basic, literally basic programming in the basic language. I'm so old, I use cartridge tapes or little audio tapes, and I thought it was kind of interesting. I ended up going to engineering school, got a degree in electrical engineering, and did realize that actually software was kind of fun. And this was, I will date myself here, this was the late 80s. And I was like, well, this is kind of interesting. But it was nothing as big as it is now. But that was kind of the beginning of the tech journey.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and it does foot with the notion that a lot of folks have. It at this moment we're in 2024. This is a global phenomenon. All the largest market cap businesses are technology companies. It was not the case in the 80s, even if you go pre-dot-com boom, and we'll get into all that in your time. But at the time you came up, it was niche still to be intact.
Very much, very much, and frankly, a lot of it was system software. So all my early work was in programming and assembler, and
Right.
at the chip level, and
Okay.
and frankly, a very different way of thinking about it. Which,
Yeah.
again, from a core engineering perspective, I thought it was fantastic, because you learn how the whole
Right.
stack works.
And by the way, chips are cool again now. So
That's right.
semis are back.
That
and
is
so it's
so true. So
it's
true.
great that you were trained at the fundamentals level, and so that's your super interesting and different background. Maybe one more on this topic is how do you incorporate that into your life now? Being raised in Brazil, is this a part of how you spend time and your connection?
Yeah. So you know what? I think the India, Brazil, U.S. connection
Yeah.
kind of allows me to be. I mean, I do think of myself as a bit of a global citizen.
Yeah.
Right. And people, when they ask where's home, I usually have a hard time answering that question. I mean, I've been in the U.S. for 30 some years now.
Mm-hmm.
It should be home. But I
Yeah.
still feel a very strong attachment to Brazil. A lot of my college friends and so on is still there.
Right.
Of course, personal origin is from India. I
Right.
married someone who's of Thai background.
Okay. Yeah.
So we try to think of the world as our oyster.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I find that to be both very healthy.
Yeah.
Occasionally kind of had to figure out, okay, kind of where do you belong?
Yeah.
But I'm always a proponent of thinking, hey, we're all citizens of the world.
Yeah.
And in a more and more globalized world, and that's what I've tried to instill in my kids as well, is like, hey, just be good humans and fit in wherever you are. So
Yeah, and in my own journey is somewhat similar, right? I mean, not nearly from a global standpoint, born in the States, raised in the States, but living in Silicon Valley now, as you do, every ecosystem in the world wants at least some connection to this region, and we can, in some level, export all the innovation from a sales and marketing and technology standpoint to these other regions, and it's been happening over the last 25 years.
Yeah, and by the way, to that point, right? I mean, we'll talk more about this, but the ability to have one foot in each, presents some really interesting opportunities to invest, to mentor, to join boards, or whatever it may be. But having that ability to, translate, if you would, across different cultures, different paths, and yes, Silicon Valley has kind of become the shining star that everybody wants to, the city on the hill everybody wants to emulate. There's lessons we can help. I urge people not to copy it, but to adapt and kind of learn from it. But I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Makes sense. So jumping in a bit so you decide tech is an interesting career path with your father's guidance. I think Oracle was the first stop, and then McKinsey. So kind of foot in the door at some, and again, I guess going back, Oracle was a pretty new company back then. And so, tell me about your first steps into the working world in tech. It sounds like in these two starting points, and then we'll get into sort of your time in the .com era.
Yeah, so the quick kind of jumping point is I did, after I got my degree in Brazil, I came to the US to get my master's. I got a master's in computer engineering and particularly focused on parallel processing, again, in the late 80s. And I was on campus at BU, Boston University, fully convinced I was going back to Brazil like the minute I was done. But this is where happenstance and macro things start to influence. Brazil in the late 80s was a kind of an abysmal state from an economic perspective. Inflation of 2,000% and a lot of uncertainty. So I'm talking to some friends and mentors and coaches, they're like, hey, if you can stay up in the US for a couple of years, just do that and then come back. So I did some interviews on campus and ran into this company that, I'll be honest, I had never heard of, called Oracle. And Oracle at the time, I mean, and the reason I hadn't heard of it, it was a database company based in Belmont, not even where they are now, based actually a mile from where I live right now. And they were a 3,500 person company doing $500 million in revenue. And they came on campus, among others, and I got a chance to interview on campus. They're like, hey, we'd like for you to come to headquarters and spend a day interviewing. I think it was 7 or 8 interviews, which was exhausting, and a lot of them were very technical and so on. But once I came to California, remember, Indian kid from Brazil, tropical, 2 winters in Boston, I was ready to get out of that. And visiting California, I think it was March. So just a beautiful, beautiful sunny day. I still kind of remember that. It's like, phew, this is a no-brainer. If I'm going to stay in the US, this is the place. So that was job one. And I did kind of just a core engineering for the first 3 years, hardcore, systems level, database, networking, parallel systems, learned a lot. Company was growing at a torrid pace, expanding from database.
Was it a public company already at that point or not yet?
It was a public company. I think if I got my dates right, Oracle was founded in 77. I think they went public in 86 or 87, and I joined in 89. So it's a few years of
super fast growing at that time for sure. And that
super fast growing, doubling in size every year.
Right. Yeah. Right. And and those who live and work in tech know that that's the standard. If you don't live and work in tech, or if you're new to it, you're like, this company's going to double in size this year and then again next year. Like that's sort of not something you're used to unless you live and work in technology markets.
Exactly. And frankly, I had never seen that. Right. And we moved into these beautiful new offices, and we doubled the headcount. Expanded from database to applications to all kinds of things, and some of the, frankly, and this is a piece of advice that I still give, some of the smartest people in the world, and they hired only from certain schools and certain backgrounds and whatnot, which we can talk more about, but super sharp. So you were always learning, and that to me was just fantastic.
And just to talk on that thread a bit, this goes to the standards question and what it takes to win in these very competitive technology markets. Did you have a sense in that moment at that time? Okay, you've made this move from Boston, you've joined this company Oracle, it's growing very fast. That did you sort of know in the moment that this was one of those companies that could become, it's obviously already public, but was a high standards kind of a place that you were going to be pushed? Did you kind of get that sense right away, and you felt that like, okay, I gotta bring my A game?
I mean, look, I think there were inklings from the interview process and just the caliber of people. These were all, they had that kind of presence, but was it a foregone conclusion that this would be just the rocket ship it ended up being? Honestly, Armin, not really. Right? That, it comes with time. There's variables along it. The one thing I will say is at the time, again, these are names that some of the listeners may never have heard of, but the big names in database at the time were IBM, still around, Sybase, not around anymore, Informix, not around anymore, and Oracle. And by the way, Oracle was considered not to be the best product. The others had kind of more robust products and whatnot. But here we are, 30 some years later, and Oracle is the 800-pound gorilla. So sometimes those intuitions, you can't take them for granted. But I think I do go back to the people factor, and the fact that the people were just smart, driven on a product perspective, from a sales perspective, from a just making sure that customers were getting what they needed and so on. That, I think, that mindset should have been the telltale sign.
Yeah, no, I mean, at the very early stages where we operate and you do when you invest and advise, I mean, this is the biggest thing we think about is people. We think
Yeah,
a bit about markets and products, but
of course.
it all flows out of people. And if you have a special group, it's hard not to go, or it's no guarantee that it'll be the winner, but it's hard not to expect some positive outcome if you have A players, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I think there's I think an adage in the industry, which is, a good team with a bad idea will
Hmm.
fix it and figure it out. A bad team with a
Yeah.
good idea, pretty
Yeah.
unfortunately, pretty strong likelihood that they'll screw it up. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
still comes down to people.
Yeah. Makes sense. And then maybe pulling the story forward a bit, you've had this amazing experience at Oracle, and I don't want to pull forward the future experiences you've had, but if you think about the variety of career experiences you've had in enterprise software, I was curious about, it's not for everyone. And each stage is not for everyone. We think about this a lot at the earliest stages. This is an amazing, I just had this conversation last week. This is an amazing person, early engineer, not for right now, probably for
Yeah,
6 months from now or a year. As
yeah.
you've been a founder, growth stage, private, public, how do you think about what's the right stage from a founder standpoint, an owner of the company, and from an employee standpoint or sort of
Mhm.
joiner standpoint? What is how to think about a good way to think about what kind of stage and what's the right fit and what personalities thrive in which environments?
Yeah. Now, look, again, I don't think there's obviously a single answer or a definitive answer to that kind of question. But I think, you have to be self-aware, right? And in the early state of someone's career, I personally think the primary goal is to learn, right? You learn academically, but to learn about the real life, the real world, kind of how things happen. How do you build a product? How do you sell it? How do you support it? How do you market it? All those things. I personally feel like in the first phase of a career, it's super helpful to be in a slightly larger company where those processes and those systems, etc., are in place. Number one. Two, again, back to the self knowledge, self awareness. It really depends on your risk profile, right? Everybody has got different circumstances of what's going on in their lives, and for some folks that could be, hey, you have school debt. For others, it could be, you're supporting a family. Others maybe, hey, you're married young, you may have kids. So, what kind of risk tolerance collectively can you take? Because let's face it, a larger company, there's a bit more security, there's a bit more infrastructure, there's a bit more guardrails. If it's a startup, guess what? Uh, you will be working very, very long. Not like you don't work long hours sometimes in large companies, but in a startup, you're guaranteed, right? And could be a 6-day week, 7-day a week, could be 12, 14, 15 hours sometimes because you're on deadline. There's all kinds of things happening. So I think having a sense for those trade-offs, and like you said, it's
Yeah.
not for everyone, right?
Yeah, or at least
The
every stage is not for everyone. I mean, we think about this
exactly.
in the context of like how it's a great insight, Avanish, and I think that the hardest part. I mean, I'm now 44, and I had a whole career pre-tech in my own case as actually a
Yeah.
Wall Street and a corporate lawyer. But
Yeah.
self-awareness is very hard to come by for someone in their early career. They don't really know. They say, what are their friends doing? And they don't really actively think about it. At least I didn't as much. And so I think it's a high bar, but I think you're right. If you can be early to early mid-career and have some awareness of what I want to do, what's a good fit, and some of those factors, all the better. Sometimes it's not as structured as that, and you just kind of do what people do.
Yeah. Now, there is, I think there is a proxy there, Upland, which is, talk to people, see
Yeah.
look around, right? And not just your managers and management. Look, there's people from your personal network, from your
Mm-hmm.
college, from your, high school, whatever,
Yep.
family, friends, parents, friends.
Yep.
Try to see what, ask them, wait, what's life like?
Yeah.
What's a day in the life?
Yeah.
What kind of gets you joy? What makes you, get
Yeah.
up and get to work and then all that versus what kind
Mm-hmm.
of drags you down. Those are
Yeah.
conversations sometimes people hesitate to have. But I
Mm-hmm.
think they're super, super important. And I think it's where
Yeah.
you get a bit of your balancing or your a framework to, even if you're not
Mm-hmm.
formally doing it or writing it down, at least it kind of your
Yeah.
mind starts to think about
Yeah.
those.
And a lot of these things are more out there now, like on social media in a way that they weren't before, where folks are
Yeah,
just sharing and you can just sort of learn by osmosis. And a lot of people write
yeah,
more. It makes a lot of sense. And I think the other thing I'd say on this topic, and then maybe we can keep going, is or prompt you on is, in our business, pre-seed and seed stage investing, we're finding sort of pirates, basically, right? Like someone who's just like, um, the founder who believes, a founding team who believes something about the world, but
yeah.
recruiting those early folks, you're kind of recruiting missionaries, pirates. It's a different kind of thing, and that's why I do like emphasizing this point of like early stage, pre-Series A. Is really not for everyone, and founders should also be keeping an eye on the best candidates in the world. And we ask our founders this: who's the stretch candidate? Who's the person you want? You won't get them. I promise you they don't want to join you now, but if you keep
Yeah.
going, they're going to be intrigued by this opportunity when you raise the Series A or the Series B or something.
Couldn't agree more. I think, at the end of the day, it is, again, this seems like it's going to be a recurring theme, but it is about the people and finding the best folks in every possible role, especially in that early stage where, everybody's pulling more than their weight, right? They're often swapping, you know, in my engineering days, I got on calls with customers who were pissed off at something that we had done. I was a young engineer, young product manager. Guess what? You put on the other hat, and so you want people who can kind of in that phase have that juggling capability, right? And say very good at what they do, but hey, at some moments you may need to, can this person, and one criteria I learned at McKinsey, which I think is still valid, is when you interview someone, you look at them and say, hey, is this someone that at the end of a 12, sometimes a 12, 13, 14-hour day, is this someone that I would want in the trenches with me? That's a test, right? Because in that early phase, you want people who are pulling the same direction, who are marching to, a common drum, and are able to, again, contribute perhaps more than what might just be
Yeah.
expected.
And I think to the comment about just the prior comment about how you have to do a lot of things. This is the pro of being at the very early stages. Is you're
Yeah.
learning on steroids. Forgive the analogy. You are being forced to do customer conversations as an engineer. You're being forced to learn new things, and that, if you want that, if that
Yeah.
appeals to you, is the best place to learn how to do something. To learn a lot really quickly. If it's not the right stage for you life wise, no problem. Do one thing well, and to take care of your other obligations. But there's nothing like the learning that comes with an early stage startup, founder or not.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Good. Let's talk a bit about a bunch of the companies if I can possibly compress an amazing career into a 15 years or 15-year period into a few minutes. Uh, Early at Salesforce, building what's now known as the App Exchange, ServiceNow building their app store ecosystem, Google Cloud thereafter. again in a similar sort of partnering role. I guess maybe start with Salesforce for a bit. Tell us a bit about that early day. This was the beginning of cloud, in effect. Maybe we'll talk about that one, and then some of these other journeys you've been on. But that one in particular, being such a foundational company in software, in cloud.
Yeah. So I mean, it is a fun story, which I look back at kind of, not only fondly, but a bit of like I almost pinch myself. So it was 2009. I was at a mid-stage startup that we had just sold. I was hoping to take some time off, but then I got a call from a friend who was at Salesforce, and I'd been a Salesforce customer, and I had known the founder Mark from days at Oracle and so on. Never thought of a place that would, necessarily be a fit for me. But they had a pitch, which was just like, again, you have to be curious, and you have to be willing to, take up some, interesting kinds of risk. It was a public company, had been larger. I'd been doing startups prior to that, and the pitch was, hey, we have this idea of a cloud-based platform, and we're calling it platform as a service. It's got a name, Force.com. But we need to figure out the business model, kind of the technology roadmap, and then ultimately, how do we go recruit third parties to build us on this platform? And to date, what we've done is for the last couple of years, we've had something called the App Exchange.
Okay.
But it's a listing of a bunch of integrations.
Like a directory, not really
it's a directory.
Right.
But we want to think about this in a much more thoughtful manner. So I was kind of brought in to be that guy. By then I had a product background, I had a consulting background, I had done marketing. So, you could think about a bit of a jack of all trades. But the idea was go figure this thing out. What's it going to take? So, my early charter was exactly that, and was to spend some time talking to a few prospective, what we'd call it partners. So third-party independent software vendors, ISVs, that had not quite either figured out or thought that the cloud was something that they should invest in or think about as part of their product strategy. And the role was to go convince some of them that by working with Salesforce, you would accelerate your cloud migration. So it was somewhat amorphous, somewhat open-ended. And however, there were some pretty specific expectations. So one of my first chats with my manager, he's like, our CEO wants 2 large enterprise software companies who are not in the cloud to commit to our platform, to announce it at our big customer event, Dreamforce, and we want both their CEOs on stage with us. Like, do we know what the companies are? Oh yeah, it's these 2 companies. And what have we done with them so far? Nothing. And how long into this was in June of 2009. And when is this event, Dreamforce? Oh, it's in November. So I'm sitting there counting, like, we're in June, and we have this kind of mindset that in 4 months we want 2 very, very large companies, in this case BMC Software, which was a mega company in the IT management space, and CA, who happens to be a direct competitor to BMC. We want both of them, who happen to be Salesforce customers on the Salesforce automation side, but because they're software companies and who've not really had any cloud-based products, let's go convince them that they should come to the cloud, number 1. 2, should come to our cloud, and oh, by the way, should make a big splash at it, about it at our event. So that was my first 4 or 5 months at Salesforce, was dealing at the C-suites of these organizations, and these are $3-4 billion a year companies who had a pretty substantial running business. But this whole cloud SaaS, they're like, this is not real. this is just a fad. So we had to find sponsors. We had to find, and we had a lot of data that showed a lot of interest from our customers from Salesforce in some things that we felt these companies could really deliver on our cloud. But I had to say, back to the working your tail off. Having worked in startups, having worked at McKinsey, etc., I didn't know that I ever worked as hard as those first 4 or 5 months at Salesforce. I pulled more all-nighters and, just all kinds of moving parts. And but we as a team we pulled it off. We found the right folks. Both CEOs came on stage. They were when we disclosed to one about the other, they were somewhat mortified that we've been working with both of them.
Sure, sure.
But in the end, it all kind of came together, and it's go ahead.
How much of that amazing story? How much of the work? How much of their in that particular case? These are not. So there's a distinction for those of us who spend time around partner ecosystems between let's build a platform for the startup ecosystem, the long tail of apps that are just getting started, and then mega incumbents here like BMCCA. Like how much of the Salesforce story at that point was? It sounds like you felt based on what you just said that it was like, oh, this is an experiment. It's experimental. It's the cloud. What's that? But was there some what got a big company, two big companies, to care about Salesforce.com at that time and Force.com?
Yeah.
Was it your sheer force of will, or did they wanted to place a bet on the cloud that like the cloud's small, but I bet it's going to get bigger. Maybe we should do this.
So I think look, I definitely not just my sheer force of will, right? By no means. I think there's a few things that contributed, kind of came together. One was, um, I think they were all watching the trends and realizing that in spite of some internal resistance, this was not a fad. And the kind of the migration of the software industry to a cloud-based model, to an as-a-service model, was here to stay. So I think there was kind of external validation of that. Two, I have to say, I think the power of Salesforce as a marketing machine, they were observing that and saying, hey, if we can get some of that, these are, again, pretty established 30 plus year companies, but they hadn't been growing that much. Things were a little bit stalled. And a bit of that pixie dust of a company like Salesforce couldn't hurt. And three, probably the most important was within these organizations, finding people who I still am friends with, by the way, today, who were willing to stick their neck out a little bit, not the C level, but maybe C minus one or two, would say, you know what, I'm willing to take this on, invest in this, and build a strategy around it, and then see what happens. So all those things had to come together, and then certainly from our side, a lot of alignment across many functions, from platform to product to marketing to sales to all that, to say, hey, once we get them, we're putting the wood behind that arrow, and we're going to deliver with them, right?
I think there are two lessons from that era or that story that I think are interesting for founders today, that come to mind.
Yeah.
One is on the people side, and then getting leaders excited about things, and the other is on the pixie dust comment you made. So on the leaders side, it's very interesting to think about, C-level CEOs are setting the direction, setting vision, but someone has to take a bet at some level in these companies. And today, if you bring it to AI and what's happening today, same thing, right? Like someone at some bigger company, if you're a smaller company or a startup, has to be bought in and excited about what you're doing. And then what I think it also can happen is you see career trajectories take off for people who were early to a new thing, and then years later say, yeah, we helped get that going. And so you kind of alluded to some folks who are further down the stack at these incumbents who said, we'll bet on Avanish, we'll bet on Salesforce and Force.com. And so you sort of like get credit in your career for having been early to a thing and executed on it. Does that resonate at all?
I think very much so. I think that was a great kind of takeaway. And I think I would just add a couple of more kind of maybe slivers to it. So one is you want to find people where you can establish a trust. It's easy to say, but really a trust-based relationship, right? If they're willing to kind of bet their, call it their careers in some cases, on you, and then you have to be there for them, right? So it's kind of that, it's a mutually respectful and high trust relationship. I think the analogy of that, from that to what you described, early stage, right? These are your early customers. These are the folks who are going to bet on you, who are going to also understand that, by the way, not everything is going to work exactly as advertised or as your slide deck said and so on, but they're willing to take the risk, and they're willing to know, or they're willing to accept the fact that you are going to be if at 2 o'clock in the morning things go down, you are there and you're going to help them and you're going to help solve it, and that you're as committed to it as they are to you, right? So I think that is one key framing. Two, I think the power of data is always very important, right? So if you can help paint a story. So I mentioned earlier briefly that we had a lot of data, we had a lot of surveys from our customers saying, hey, we need, if we had X, in this case, a help desk, an IT help desk running on the Force.com platform, we could use that because there's nothing quite like it out there. And we like how Salesforce delivers, but you guys don't do IT help desk. And I had months of research from inside the Salesforce research team that said, hey, this is something we need. We have internally had agreed not to build that. Therefore, we needed someone to build that. So taking that data to a BMC and saying, look, here's kind of the validation. And again, as much customer validation as you can bring to the table, the better.
Yeah. Yeah. So the lesson there being, it's not really about taking flyers. It's from a partnering standpoint or anything. It's really about ideally having data. I think the customers betting on startups thing is for sure universal advice we see. Someone is going to take a bet on you as a pre-series A startup to say, sure, but I'm not really betting on this product as it's fully baked. I'm betting on this team. I'm betting on support, and I'm betting on them growing the product into my needs over time.
Exactly. And again, knowing almost for a certainty that whatever plan was put in place is going to have to change, and there's going to be some adaptations. Yeah. But it's back to the point you made. It is about the team, and will this be a team that will be there when I need them or when we need them? Right.
Yeah. The comment you made about that there was some sense in the early days at that point of Salesforce that there's some marketing magic, and Mark Benioff being famous for this. I've seen this and we've lived this a bit at Okta as well. I mean, of course, the Okta DNA comes from Salesforce,
that's right.
That family tree, if you will.
Yeah.
And the ability to do, and this is a good segue, I think, to the next topic, is the ability to do marketing. Of course, it's a different scale, public company versus where we at least spend time now, pre-seed seed A. But I think the point holds, which is how do you, as a startup or growth company, tell your story and get marketing and how you can win or dramatically tip the odds in your favor based on marketing rather than product. This is a hotly age-old topic, product versus distribution. You've been around some of these amazing distribution-driven or world-class distribution-centric teams, ServiceNow, Salesforce. What did they get right that is relevant for startups? What is so good about why these guys won, these guys didn't? BMC didn't make the transition to cloud, ServiceNow did, and maybe it's about catching the technology wave. But I'm just talking about sales and marketing clearly is a differentiator in enterprise software. What can we learn from your experiences that's relevant to early stage startups in that context?
Yeah, now this is where I'm going to be a little bit maybe provocative or contrarian.
Sure, good, good.
I alluded to this even in the context of Oracle. The best technology doesn't always win. And we have a tendency, I remember I'm an engineer too, we have a tendency to beat our chest around the technology and look, it's better, faster, cheaper, all that good stuff. I'm going to suggest that the best marketing, and I've done startup marketing, and I think the hook comes in two forms. One is truly credibly delivering your value message. It's like, how do you deliver? Nobody's sitting around waiting to say, hey, today I'm going to wake up and go buy a piece of software. They're trying to solve a problem. And in solving that problem, whatever that problem may be, there has to be value delivered. They need to get more than what they paid for. It's a simple equation, but it's truly, truly hard to make that work. So the examples you gave of, ServiceNow, Salesforce, I was on the board of Hubspot for many years. When you looked at the marketing of those companies, it focused on value delivered. So I think that's a fundamental thing that sometimes we forget, and it comes.
What do people do? What do people do incorrectly in that context? They sort of talk about features and functionality, but not actual value to the customer.
Exactly, 100%. It's the, we've got look at how good our product is, but not what can we do for you, right? And that has a corollary, which I think is also, and this one I think Salesforce has been spectacular, and other companies do it well too, which is make the customer the hero, right? Salesforce would put out, and again, there's expenses associated with it, so it doesn't always have to be like this. There's many different ways of doing this. But I'm going to use the example of billboards that Salesforce would put up all over the place with the face of someone like Angela Arhens. She was a CEO of Burberry, talking about Burberry's customer intimacy had increased substantially by using Salesforce. And there was many people like that, right? So you make the customer kind of tell your story, right? And these days that can be done through a podcast. That can be done through a 2-minute Loom video. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of doing that. But again, tie it to the value and allow the customer to tell the story. That's ideal. Now, of course, in early stage, the answer or the question is always obviously going to be chicken or egg. If I don't have a customer, how do I tell that? Well, there are ways to define the problem, empathize with the prospective customer, and then describe how you deliver value in solving that problem, right? So I think the same concept applies, how you tell the story. And by the way, that's the third thing, which often I think a lot of product marketers, technology marketers sometimes forget. It has to be a story. Storytelling, the best product marketers are storytellers. They're not describing feature functions. They're setting the context. They're describing the problem, describing how you solve it, value delivered, etc. Right? So that narrative works like a charm. And the Salesforce product marketing team, I have to say, even now, a lot of them are good friends of mine. It was just magic. It was totally magic.
Yeah. No, it's an amazing insight and easy to get lost in the weeds of I think maybe another way to say what you're saying is, look, you have table stakes, if you will, is especially in an AI era that we're in right now. There's a lot of innovation, genuine innovation. It probably is going to drive customer value, but you've got to. It's necessary, but not sufficient. You've got to talk about why this solves a problem. And as an investor, we think about this ex ante, which is cool tech. Is that going to solve anyone's problem? And should we invest based on that?
Solving those problems, and by the way, is their willingness to part with scarce resources to solve the problem, right? The combination has to come together. Again, if you have the best mousetrap, but nobody needs a mousetrap.
I think what makes AI a little different right now is just having a conversation about this morning, just in this particular moment, is there's actually a meaningful amount of budget being put behind experimental. And so it's not solving a problem, but it's explicitly not solving a problem. It's saying, this seems cool. What can we do with a vector database? But I think eventually that's just experimental revenue, not recurring revenue. You're going to have to solve a problem at some point.
I could not agree more. Yeah. And I think at some point, the technologists have to get out of the way, and the business users and the broader audience has to adopt and and consume it and use it. So yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. We are in that phase, but
Yeah.
I think that'll shift.
Yeah, and then one sort of story from my own career that resonated with your point about customers doing your marketing for you when you have them. Hold on to them dearly, and certainly we tell early stage startups to, if you can, in whatever way you can, get authorization, permission, partnership with your customers to tell your story. Of course, one of the stories from my early time at Okta that was, again, I was relatively new to software. I had sort of a different background. And we did a QBR, and a sales rep had stood up and said, by the way, or this is then early days of Okta, relatively speaking, said our customer got promoted. And this was huge, right? Because I was like, immediately the light bulb goes off. Like, if your customer is championing your startup and they deploy it successfully and they got promoted, at least in part because of that successful deployment, there is no better marketing than a customer, growing in their career. And then of course they have more authority and they'll tell their friends. So I think that's another version.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, man, it's a great anecdote of proof point that you're delivering value, right?
Yeah. Let's keep going. I've got a few more minutes of your time, Avanish. I want to talk a bit about, kind of relationships and mentorship. You're sort of, I think, at this point in your career, I believe, where you're stepping back from being full time and have been a part of these amazing journeys. How important were, you mentioned a couple times already, folks you met in the early days, who you maintain friendships with now? How important were relationships to your career? Did you know it at the time in your earlier mid-career that these people are going to matter? And then I want to talk about mentorship as well. So maybe just pick either of those if you'd like.
Sure. No, thank you for bringing that up, because I personally feel both indebted and was amazingly blessed to have some of those, many of those actually. And was it intentional? No. But have they been the relationships? One thing I'll say, and hopefully there's no executive recruiter listening to this, I've never gotten a job through an executive recruiter. It's always been through the network, including my board role, by the way, board roles. It was always through the networks. And it goes back to that concept of trust-based relationships, right? Can you establish relationships that are not just transactional, where it could evolve even into a deeper friendship, but the baseline is their trust, and are the person across the table, can they count on you to be there for when they need you, and therefore vice versa, right? So I have a number of those relationships from even back in college days in Brazil, and I'm thankful for those every day, and they've evolved. Some of them have become, like I said, they have become friendships. Some of them have evolved into friendship plus mentorship. Some of them are folks that are literally a text or phone call away at any point in time, for whatever it may be, right? It's just that's part of it. So that and even this conversation, right? It's because we got to know each other, and we built trust, and it's been many years now. The mentorship part, I think, is often underappreciated, under invested in, and I try to give that guidance to anybody and everybody who's willing to listen. Which is, I am at the tail end of my career, where I'm no longer in a career. I still have mentors. I still talk to people about the things I am contemplating. Now it's no longer be about careers, but it may be about, hey, board roles, about what does the future hold? How where do we find the right framework for thinking about healthcare for as we kind of go into the sunset years and so on, all kinds of things. And those are conversations that you want to have with people you like and trust. But obviously, it's even better if it's with people who maybe have been through that journey, can give you experience-based perspectives. And by the way, I think the mentorship works when it's a two-way street. It's not a talking down to, or hey, here's my 20-point diatribe on a particular issue. With the folks I mentor, and I have a number of new mentees recently from the the work I'm doing at Stanford, I learn from every one of those conversations, right? So we try to get on a cadence. And again, the only thing I ask for is, hey, have some core topics. So it's not just a casual, we can always do a casual coffee catch up, but if it's a bit of a mentorship conversation, let's pick 2 or 3 topics, go a little bit deeper, but it is always 2 ways. And I learn about, what's going on in people's minds and their environments, generationally, what's different. So I always make time and urge people to find time to do that. And the rewards come in, infinite ways.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Yeah, I think I may have seen Steven Spielberg talk about this recently, where he learns from young directors. So he's still
Yeah,
learning. Is for beginner's mindset, I think, is another way to say what you're saying. It's super interesting.
absolutely. And it could be for all kinds of, topics, right? So right now, a lot of my focus is on sustainability and climate. It's things that I haven't dealt with before, but I think it's existential. And I'm learning from, 20 some year olds who are, thinking about startup ideas, thinking about how to, address this issue that they feel like our, my generation ignored. And it's fascinating how much you can learn about kind of what's going through their minds, how they're thinking about the process, and then maybe bring some of your other experiences of, fundraising, business building. Yeah, I can help them with that, but I'm learning about, kind of the problem they're trying to solve, right?
Yeah, we talked to founders about this too a bit, which is you kind of don't know it in the moment, but if you do it right, you're gonna look back on this time fondly. Whatever happens with this startup, there are gonna be
Yeah,
other startups. You're gonna keep recruiting each other. The person who works for you now is gonna start a company, and you're gonna want a job working for them
yeah,
in 5 years.
yeah,
It is weirdly a small world. Venture and technology has gotten so much bigger, and yet the formation of certain companies tends to be amongst a certain group, and I think this is all the more reason relationships matter. If you're fortunate to know it at the early days in your career, to say, I'm going to be a good actor. I'm not going to drop the mic and walk out the door.
yeah,
And that's going to pay off. And by the way, we all talk. Investors talk. C levels talk. We say that girl's toxic. That guy's toxic. You might not want to go there. And so I
yeah.
think that relationship and sort of being forward thinking about your career matters even more, I think, in startup land, where it's a repeated game. You're continuing to engage with the same
Yeah.
people over and over.
No, I think that's very, very well articulated. And I would make just two comments on that. One, I think is a construct that I'm not sure I've necessarily formalized it, but I think it's a good construct. And it's something that John Donahoe, former CEO of ServiceNow, now CEO of Nike, brought up in a couple of conversations. It's like having a personal board of directors, right? We're startup land, you have investors and so on, that's your board, you have outside members and so on. But even at a personal level, create a circle of folks that's your trusted brain trust, and that you can leverage and kind of be part of other people's board of kind of boards. I think it's a neat concept, and I think something to maybe emulate. The other one, kind of only half tongue in cheek, and you alluded to this, but I think it's important to say, careful who you piss off. And it's a small world. And if you
Don't give
once
me any names, but give me some way without names that this has you have observed this maybe personally or a third party where this
yeah,
worked out against someone because they did piss
I
someone
I
off
you
and
know
it turned
I'll,
out they
I'll give an
pissed them.
example again. Yeah, I won't name names, but
Yeah, yeah,
there's someone who at some point worked for me,
yeah,
was had a difficult relationship, not just with me, but with a lot of people that they worked with,
yeah.
and we fired them. And then once we fired them, I was like, hey, that's unfortunate, but it happens, and it was the right decision to make.
Mm-hmm.
Then I landed another company, and then turns out this person was pretty far down the pipe
Mm,
in the process with that company.
mm.
So I called I felt an obligation. So I
Yeah.
called the hiring manager. I said, you know what, this person, I don't, I hear some hard examples of, it's not just my opinion, but here's examples of kind of how they simply were
Yeah.
not a team player.
Yeah.
And, that, by the fact that I was this person's former direct manager and so on, that led to
Yeah.
a likely offer being
Rescinded or
cut short.
not made. Yeah.
And
No.
and and I felt it was my obligation my new company to inform them, because what I would not want is for this person to come on board and then they realize, wait,
yeah,
they worked with you and you're not, you never told us.
yeah,
Right? So
yeah,
it's an
yeah,
example of a small world problem.
for sure. And hiring reflects on everyone, and everyone talks, and so everyone will observe who gets hired. The personal board of directors point, Rishi and I are going through this as a startup fund ourselves. We're on fund one. We're in effect, we're building a brand and a franchise. And one of the pieces of advice we've got is, you've got your LPAC, your folks who are formal board on your
Yep.
LP committee. What about that informal board of GPs? We sort of call it the GPAC. Who are the GPs who are, some of whom are investors in the fund, many of whom are not, but who are willing to lend an ear to us as we build this business, but informally, I think is an analogous version of what you're saying that people can have in their life.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Good. I'm getting close to the end of my time with you, Avanish. I want to give you a window, a forum on two topics. One is AI. What are you seeing? What are you experiencing personally? Companies you're advising, investing in, passing on. So just what's your take on what's happening in AI, maybe particularly as it relates to enterprise software, since you spend so much time there, and it's also where we spend time. And then the last topic I'll just kind of leave you as an open forum is kind of any advice you have, non-consensus contrarian. You've offered us some. Anything else you kind of want to leave us with today?
Now, AI, I have no idea what you're talking about. Never heard of it.
What is this AI thing you speak of?
It may be big someday, right? So look, I have to say, again, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in the Valley since 1989, so 35 years. And now, so I've seen, the shift from mainframe to mini to client server. That's how old I am. Internet 1.0, mobile, and the advent of iPhone and Android and so on. Certainly the social networks, etc. I have never, in those many years, seen anything catch fire as quickly and as broadly as what, frankly, let's call it what it is, as what ChatGPT brought to the table. Right? AI has been embedded. AI has been around for decades, right? As a concept. It's been embedded in a whole bunch of tools that we've used every day, from Uber to Airbnb and whatnot. But the accessibility and kind of the headline that it became post October, November of 22, mind blown, right? Now, what does that mean for enterprise software? So there's many different ways of looking at it, and I have invested and advised a bunch of companies who are either adding or native into it and so on. I think it is. I think it'll be massive. It is. There's no doubt about it. But I think the way to think about it is a couple fold. One is AI alone is not going to do anything, right? I think the notion of AGI and all that, I think that's a bit. It may come, but probably not in our lifetimes. However, embedding AI to make processes and workflows smarter and more efficient and more optimized, that's where I think the world's going, right? And therefore, kind of the data layer, the AI models, and the AI data management layer, and the workflows on top of that. That's what I'm looking for. Is how can horizontal processes, vertical solutions, etc. How can they be optimized and infused with AI-driven optimization or improvements, but not AI for the sake of AI. That I think is a bit of a challenge. That's kind of what I see out there.
We're seeing the same thing. I mean, it's AI infused, AI powered, AI native, what have you.
Yeah.
Both at the UI, interaction layer, but of course at the workflow and automation layer. But not AI for AI's sake. The hardest part as an early stage investor in this moment is to disaggregate the two. That's our job. But it is absolutely, we're seeing the same thing. It's a new day, and it's exciting. It's a very exciting time.
Yeah.
Last word I'll leave to you. What else would you like to share with us that I haven't asked you about?
Well, look, it's always such a fun conversation. So again, huge appreciation for having me on.
Yeah, of course.
Look, my word of advice to founders and others is it's never easy, but it's a lot of fun. And my urging or my advice is you're not going to get it
Hmm.
right the first time. So don't let that get you down. We talk a lot about resilience. We talk a lot about persistence. Those things are real. Those things, you can look around and all the very, very, very successful folks that we talk about today, you go
Hmm.
back and look in their history, there's failures. There is,
Yeah.
and that is the one thing that, if I may, in that
Yeah.
journey you asked where we started circling all the way back from
Yeah.
India to
Of course.
Brazil to here, the one thing that I think more than any technology, more than any innovation, more than any of that crap, that Silicon Valley has enabled the rest of the world to um, adopt or accept is that failure is okay.
Yeah.
That is not a mindset that existed in my college in Brazil, right? If people, had a bankruptcy or failure or something went sideways, they would fall off the face of the earth, right?
Yeah.
Or, in India, where, both you and I have our origins
Yeah.
there,
Right.
people graduated, they went to work for the government, for the
Yeah.
banks, for the multinationals, right? Risk taking, you know, this was not in the vernacular 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
I think by virtue of what Silicon Valley has, demonstrated, yes, you can create a lot of wealth and you can create all kinds of gizmos and so on. But I think at the core of it, from a behavior perspective, it's okay to fail. It's okay to, as long as you learn from that, you
Yeah.
get up and go. Right. So that to me
Yeah.
is one of the long term lessons of what we're living through.
Truly a transformative point, and I just add slightly that it does take risk capital who's willing to back failures, quote unquote,
Yeah.
in quotes,
Yep.
and say, yeah, that's okay. It's part of the game. You're gonna do it better next time. We do that, and that export, if you will, to the world. I see the same thing.
Yeah.
Avanish, thank you so much for this. This has been super fun. I really do appreciate you sharing some of your journey. We'll find time to do it again and talk about other stuff, but I'm sure the audience is going to love this. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Is truly delighted to, and
Yeah,
best of luck in your guys' journey as well.
awesome. Thanks, Avanish. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.